investment in agricultural research and development actually affects productivity of different and performance of different sectors of agriculture across the globe. And it shows clearly that there is a very good return on investment for countries that invest in agricultural R&D. And that's why the case for sub-Saharan Africa to increase investment in R&D is actually even stronger. And some of you in the room may actually recall that there is even a declaration in Africa to invest through the Malabo Declaration to invest a minimum of 10% in agricultural R&D by countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for which many countries still fall way behind. Now, what are some of these trends in the technological landscape? We have seen, and thank you very much to my colleagues who have helped me to put together some of these nice images that we have here that show some of the technologies that are available to us within the agricultural R&D space, from breeding technologies for climate smart livestock production. We have some of the genomic selection technology, devices for cost-effective measurement of feed efficiency and water footprint. So when you look at these technologies, this is what assists us to select for breeds, for instance, that are going to withstand some of these changes that are coming up with climate change, in order to be able to adapt or have breeds that are adaptable to the changes in climate as we see it. There are also technologies, as you can see, that are targeted at some of the products that are coming out of the animal production space, to assist us to have a longer shelf life of animal products. And we also have a number of ICT technologies that assist us, particularly for data collection, this being one of the key challenges within our continent. And my colleagues who are going to come a little bit later will be talking about specifics within that space in terms of ICT technologies, what exactly it is that is happening in that space, and what opportunities exist for us as the continent. Within the area of parasites and vector-borne diseases, again, there is a lot of work that has been happening, from taxonomy and systematics, the development of better diagnostic equipment, and of course, new generation vaccines. For some of the highly economic impacting diseases of livestock. We, as the ARC, have also been participating in the development of a number of these vaccines, as some of you in the room may be aware. And we are also, I think, one of the long-running battles that we've had with the FMD as the country and as the region is now being addressed through the development of a facility that has long been coming at the ARC, which is going to assist us to cap the reliance on importing FMD vaccines as a country, including dealing with the one that that we are dealing with currently, which I think a number of you will have picked up the announcement about the lockdown on animal movement, etc. Because again, like all these other diseases, the importance of these diseases is that they have a significant economic impact on the industry and affect, the sustainability of the sector as a whole. Within the crop space, we can start with some of the technologies in small grain area, where we have technologies that are aimed at dealing with the changing climate impact, increasing yields under challenging climate conditions, as well as producing cultivars that are adaptable to these effects, including those that are disease and pest resistant. Colleagues within the ARC use a number of these technologies like molecular markers, phenotypic screening, and agronomic cultivars, agronomic adaptability, in order to produce cultivars that can be stable, robust under some of these conditions. And several crops have been included in the range of crops that have been subjected to some of this technology development, including wheat, barley, and now we are moving also slowly into the space of rice, because some of you will be aware that in the past South Africa was considered a country that is completely unsuitable for rice production, with just a number of small patches in the northeastern part of the country that were considered maybe suitable, but it was at the time also considered that that level of production would never reach commercial scale, and that we are looking at maybe just a subsistence production of rice. But information that's coming up is that perhaps those that studied the landscape at the time maybe underestimated the potential. But this is not just about South Africa. Now our scientists are also working with others who have been doing work on rice across the continent. As you know, this is one of the major staples across the continent, particularly in the West Africa part of the continent. And there is a lot of work, of course, that is associated with surveillance and early warning systems that assists us to prepare for the emergence of diseases and changes in climate that affect different crops, as well as livestock. For instance, I think one that stands out is the e-locust system, which is, as you all know, we've had this problem in the continent, where there is a system that prepares and can forewarn or forecast and manage outbreaks, locust outbreaks, which can be, again, also highly significant economically in terms of its impact on the sector, which is why that investment continues to be particularly important. Other types of technologies that are being used now, and these are available also across the continent, include drones, smart farming technologies, etc. And some of you are familiar with these. I've just been told that I've run out of time. The area of precision agriculture is also maturing in the continent. The ARC, they have also now, we've managed to take some of these technologies and put them together in an easily accessible app on the phone, which can be used also by farmers, providing ready access to these types of technologies. So again, these are questions that are rhetorical in nature, in the sense that we all know that we need to look at our capacity for agricultural research systems. We need to invest more. We need to look at our delivery systems that bring innovations to farmers and agribusinesses. We need to reduce costs and risk of adopting new technologies and find ways of accelerating adoption of these relevant technologies. I think just skipping one of the areas perhaps that I didn't touch on, which remains a very important consideration when we talk about technology in Africa, is the area of policy, because often our policy development runs behind the technology development itself, which is very essential to facilitate adoption and closing the gap between those who develop the technology and those who are going to implement it. And this is a space that within Africa we need to play a more targeted role and give it a more targeted effort in order to make sure that the development of technology by scientists, which is under no question, does reach the intended recipients, and that the intended recipients are able to apply it and use it to improve their own livelihoods. Thank you very much, colleagues. And once again, thanks to my colleagues who helped me with all these beautiful images of the technologies that we have in the landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lita. I think to manage time and also to make sure that we have everything pegged together for further discussions, I would ask our next panelist, Dr. Maneshri, to give us a presentation. So please write down your questions. If you think you can forget, you can forward them to me, but keep them, then we can have them in the discussion forum. Maneshri.
Good morning again, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. And thank you very much to my colleague, Dr. Makinga, because I think he's really set the scene in terms of what are some of the key challenges and what are some of the key things that we need to be doing to promote agricultural innovation in Africa. The outline of my presentation, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit on what are some of the key policy frameworks for agricultural innovation in Africa. Sorry. And then I'm going to go on to Africa's ability to innovate in the context of building bioeconomies. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the South African experience and key enablers for implementation. It's quite a comprehensive talk, so I will try to keep to the time, but my apologies in advance. So please forgive me if I rush through some of the stuff, but I think it's important. Just taking a backtrack, and I think because we are talking in BioAfrica to agricultural innovation in Africa, it's important to remind ourselves of what are the key frameworks that govern agricultural innovation in Africa. And at the very outset, the African Union agenda sets a tone for the need to increase agricultural productivity, to support sustainability through science, technology, and innovation. And in its implementation, this links with the STISA 2024, which aims to transform Africa into a knowledge-based and innovation-led society through the promotion of human capital development, innovation, value addition, industrialization, and entrepreneurship. And under this, priority 1 is particularly important, which is to eradicate hunger and ensure food and nutrition security, because nutrition security, hidden hunger, is becoming critical aspects that we need to address, particularly in the context of household food insecurity. I also want to talk very briefly, because I think it links very well in terms of what's starting to happen in terms of our relationships with the EU and partnerships with others, including in Africa. So in terms of the AU-EU innovation agenda, there's a strong focus now on sustainable and inclusive growth and job creation, because that becomes the critical building blocks, not just the innovation, but what can we use it for? How can it be applied? And its principles are co-creation, co-ownership, sustainability, transparency, and its objectives are make it real, because it's become very critical that we start to look at the practical applications of these technologies, the use of it, etc. And the impact, the design of how we design our programs. We want to strengthen people, not only put technologies out there, but look at how they can access this. And I think Dr. Makinga talked to making sure then that the communities access these technologies. And we need to monitor them and be able to scale it up. So in terms of the EU-Africa, critical is that the conversation has now gone to international research consortium. This is what the current dialogue is in the public domain. There's a document that's being considered, and it's about how, in terms of food, nutrition, and sustainable agriculture, we can support coherence, synergy, optimization of initiatives, improved access to partners with similar interests, and a greater long-term impact. And I think this is very important if we want to increase trade in Africa in terms of the African Free Continental Trade Agreement. We need to be able to trade with our own partners in the region. And we need to build Africa as a lead continent when it comes to agricultural innovation, given the opportunities we have in terms of land, etc. And the potential we have to use that land. And so in terms of the International Research Consortium, at the moment they're looking at the expression of intent from various partners to form this consortium. So next I'm just moving on to Africa's ability to innovate in the context of building a bioeconomy. And I'm drawing from a recent paper that was published by the Malaba Montpellier panel, which I have also been a part of in terms of supporting, as a government official, the final report. Now, it draws on the definition of the bioeconomy as the production, utilization, and conservation of biological resources, including related knowledge, science, technology, and innovation to provide information, products, processes, and services across all economic sectors. So you can see from the frameworks that we have and from the definitions of the bioeconomy, we are now starting to look at what is the socioeconomic impact. And I think Dr. Makinga talked to the essential elements. We're moving towards a more digital economy. We need the technologies, but we also need to take into account the socioeconomics. By way of just a quick sweep of what the recent report did. So they looked at Africa's ability to contribute to a bioeconomy, and it was based on two indices, the Global Innovation Index, which is supported by Cornell University, INSEAD, and WIPO, and which comprises both input and output measures, including, so the input measures are innovation activities, institutions, human capital, infrastructure, mass market sophistication, etc., as well as some of the outputs then from innovation, and then versus biomass and obviously biomass and biodiversity. And within this context, they identified 6 countries in Africa which really have high global innovation indices, and they have high biomass. So the case studies from the 6, they chose 4. So the 6 were Mauritius, South Africa, Namibia, Uganda, Ghana, and Tanzania. So from a regional perspective, they chose 4 countries, which were South Africa, Namibia, Uganda, and Ghana. And a quick snapshot of what these studies, or the highlights from there. So I've mentioned that all 4 countries have rich biodiversity. For example, Ghana has large stocks of biomass and is ideal for setting up bio-industries. So in the study, STI was found to be central to Ghana's socioeconomic development, and the supported scale-up is, they do focus on agriculture, forestry, energy, and waste management. And interestingly, and this is the country has transformed their cocoa sector with biosciences and technology, and they've also established a wide range of industries for cashew, shea, and byproducts. So those of you who've been to Ghana, you know that shea products are on the shelf in their airport shops. So that is something that I think is really, we must sort of learn from. There's a support for tertiary institutions. They also, there's a lot of development in terms of integrating herbal medicines into standard healthcare delivery. So I'll move on to the next country, and that's Namibia. There is, although they don't have their bioeconomy strategy approved yet, they do have one that's been developed in conjunction with the FAO, and there is political support. So we're hoping that very soon their bioeconomy strategy will be approved. There's a number of bioeconomy-related activities, and in particularly, they are looking at multi-stakeholder partnership programs and working with all different role players. In particular, they have had successes in terms of their game meat and developing the food chain, as well as controlled bush thinning of pasture land. And they also have one of the best national biodiversity strategy and action plans. Moving on to the next country. So South Africa then, and I'm going to talk a little bit more to South Africa. So I think in my slides that come, so South Africa is the only country in Africa which has an integrated and comprehensive bioeconomy strategy. And through the structures and instruments that we have in place, we have NACI, we have the Technology Innovation Agency, and we are supported in terms of intellectual property management by NIPMO. South Africa also has been able to attract a lot of investment, internationally, and there are various instruments in agriculture which support incubation and commercialization. The last country on my list is Uganda, and Uganda has been gaining traction in terms of a hub of excellence on agricultural R&D. They have won the coveted African Higher Education Centers of Excellence project by the World Bank. They have various incubators, specifically in agriculture, on food technology and business incubation, and the Uganda Industrial Research Institute, which supports bioenterprises. Now, key recommendations from the study is on how to take and how to be more innovative is that they've identified gateway sectors through which it's important to identify gateway sectors through which to initiate the development of transition to a bioeconomy. So really about positioning markets, strengthening links to R&D and markets for new products, developing demand for bioproducts, regulating for sustainable incentives and to manage trade-offs, and set up independent national advisory boards. So this sort of gives you a flair of, what is the key recommendations, and how we can take how can we innovate more within Africa. Now, the South African experience, and what are some of the key enablers for implementation? If we look at our agricultural bioeconomy, and looking at measuring the bioeconomy, we actually don't have sufficient data. More recent estimates that we've done suggest that our bioeconomy contributes 8.4% to GDP, of which 34% is agriculture. And I think on a ratio and proportion, that's particularly significant. Sorry, I didn't realize the slide didn't move. So in terms of investment in agriculture, despite us not meeting the overall investment in GERD, in terms of 1% of GDP, agricultural investment in agricultural R&D is steadily increasing. And we also have a high level of scientific capability. So this talks to, so what are some of the key enablers that help us to build bioeconomies? SA Researcher Citation Index is higher than the world average. In terms of entrepreneurship, we have a higher percentage of entrepreneurs with new-to-market technologies of 5 years and less compared to other BRICS countries. but total early stage entrepreneurial activity in terms of agriculture has been decreasing. There's a need for greater investment, venture capital investment. But definitely we have good structures, like I said, in terms of tech transfer and commercialization, and particularly through our institutions, the offices of technology transfer, etc., which are supposed to assist us with getting a product into the market. So why is our commercialization of technology low? I mean, obviously you need to invest higher figures in order to get more products in the market. But agriculture is unique, and I don't have I haven't put the slide in, but I recently did a study some years ago in 2018 where I interviewed a lot of these companies, and market is a key challenge for agricultural innovators. Market is the top obstacle to innovators in agriculture. And at the next level, and these came up at the same level, the issue around technology refinement. If you don't have support and you don't have the necessary people to refine your technology, and you can't do it fast enough to meet that market demand, you've lost the opportunity. Finding opportunities is also funding and funding management also come up as key stumbling blocks. I mean, a company can fall if they don't get the necessary operational funds in time in order to save the startup during the early stages. So where are we as South Africa? And I'm just going to give a quick snapshot. So in South Africa, like I said, Dr. McKing has already highlighted some of the key challenges, that within at least 3 of our provinces, KZN, Eastern Cape and Limpopo, they have the limited access to basic services, but they have the highest number of agri households. And if we look at the number of commercial farmers, there's 35,000 of them, and if you look at smallholder farmers, there's 300,000 to 700,000. But our commercial farmers contribute 80% to all of the produce in South Africa. So really, it's the issues around spatial planning and etc. become very critical. Now, I've mentioned a lot of the other frameworks in the slide that talk to how South Africa functions in terms of other strategies. But within South Africa, we also have the new Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, which is really intending to say, well, we still have many challenges post-1994. How can we increase the efficiency of our instruments? How can, through the master plan, we increase the efficiency of the support, of the input support that we give to farmers? So there's 6 areas: resolving ambiguities and increasing investment, market expansion, and there's comprehensive farmer support, R&D and extension services, food security, expanded production and employment creation, creating enabling infrastructure and trade, and then localized food import replacement and expanded agro-processing. Now, key aspect of this in terms of R&D is the support for innovation, and this is where the Department of Science and Innovation comes in. And so we are busy with the STI roadmap for agriculture in response to both the master plan, but also in response to our new decadal plan that is currently out for consultation. And the draft decadal plan, the DSI at a broader level, not just agriculture, has taken a stance that in order for us to be more innovative as a country, we need to ensure that we support innovations that contribute to service delivery innovation, to energy efficiency, that we support, that we are able to support modernizing our sectors such as agriculture, mining and manufacturing, in order to support inclusivity, transformation, partnerships, and economic recovery. So I do realize I'm running out of time a little bit. I think I'll just explain the theory of change and then stop there. So in terms of the decadal plan, the agricultural priorities have put forward an innovation-driving growth perspective in terms of the theory of change of how innovation can revitalize the agricultural sector and ensure economic recovery. That through the innovations and interventions, and Dr. Makinga has mentioned many of the key challenges, that through these innovations and interventions in crop improvement, in animal improvement, agro-processing and value chain development becomes, as well as value chain analysis, identifying what's the key opportunity. Through the various programs, including food and nutrition and farmer innovation support, we want to contribute to new products, processes, and technology services, supporting new and emerging farmers to become commercialized, bio-innovation in support of food and nutrition, and supporting the skills. And within this, the context of digital agriculture to ensure that we support scientifically validated databases that can be harnessed to allow access to farmers to the most modern technologies. And through this, it's about the increased GDP, decision support systems underpinned by science, biosecurity in terms of pests and diseases, boosting rural economies, ensuring traceability and connected supply chains. This has been really critical in terms of COVID, supporting SMEs and entrepreneurship, and then job creation as a result of skills transfer, as well as inclusion and competitiveness. And the way to do this is through coordination, facilitation, and multidisciplinary and multi-institutional agricultural innovation programs to drive productive value chains. I just want to, so these are then the stakeholders that are involved in various programs, and I won't go into that, but so if you look at some of the programs, we have a wheat breeding platform, and it's really about multi-stakeholder partnership programs, including in the this is in the forestry sector, where public-private partnerships are really making an indent in terms of supporting industries to be more productive. And this is just then looking at, when I said value chain, looking at the opportunities. There's been a recent study, and we'll share the slides with you in terms of value chain development. A lot of work around agro-processing, and these were then just the examples. And I think later on in this session, there's also going to be some discussion around digital and precision agriculture. And I've mentioned some of the things that are happening, and it's about bringing these digital technologies and making them more accessible. And then in terms of what are the skills, not just masters and PhDs, looking at technicians, looking at the pipeline of skills that are needed to drive productivity in agriculture. Thank you. My apologies. But we will share the slides. Okay, thank you very much.
I realized I started with two excited speakers. They could speak the whole day. I don't know if there are burning questions for discussion, clarity from the audience. Whilst you're busy doing that, both of you, Dr. Litha and Dr. Manishri. So Dr. Litha, you talked about the existence of smallholder farmers and commercial farmers and that technology divide. And Dr. Manishri, in your presentation, you put in many other African countries with their highlights. And I was just thinking, what can we learn from each other as a continent? I'm thinking of South Africa more with a bigger component, maybe of commercial farmers and also smallholder farmers, but other African countries that actually, some of them predominantly smallholder farmers. How can we learn, or what are we learning from that diversity, particularly in the context of trying to mainstream everyone, to take everyone on board and ensure that they are able to innovate, they are able to uptake the technologies and use the technologies to advance agriculture? So maybe some response from both of you.
Thank you very much. I think, sorry? It's on. Can you hear me? All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Muchari. I think one of the first things to talk about is that when we look at our agricultural landscape across the continent, we have a high prevalence in other countries for small-scale agriculture compared to South Africa, for instance, which seems to just stand alone, where you have a more organized agricultural sector that is more commercial, that is more consolidated, but also maybe more integrated across value chains. And I think for the numbers of small-scale producers that we have in this country, which naturally are more than what you have in terms of comparing with the thousands of large-scale commercial producers, there is a number of well-established models of integration across the African continent that could serve as lessons for South Africa, for South African small-scale producers, because that's one of the key issues that you always deal with when you talk about South African small-scale agriculture. The second thing is when it comes to technology geared to small-scale producers, again, we have a number of beautiful examples from different parts of the world, not only in Africa, but other parts of Asia, where technology targeted at small-scale producers is actually doing quite well. And these are the kinds of partnerships that we should be looking at. So both from a production perspective and also from a market integration perspective. And I think if we start looking at our own agricultural sector in South Africa, instead of looking at it as these two different blocks, as we always say that we have a dual agricultural system, we should start looking at it maybe as more of a spectrum. And we should then, have systems and policies that are going to assist us to respond to that. The Department of Agriculture has done a bit of good work in terms of developing policy that's targeted at supporting small-scale producers, because that's where most of the intervention is required. And I think in order to be more targeted to support that part of the sector, I think that's going to go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Mishu.
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Makinga already talked to the issue in terms of our differences of organized agriculture in South Africa, and I think the levies we collect is an opportunity is an opportunity cost in terms of our collaboration and partnership in multi-stakeholder programs that involve industry. It allows us to cross that divide and to work more easily with industries that are able to provide the input costs on the one hand, while we provide the support for development of innovations. And we've got a number of programs that have really started to show that. Secondly, I think as a country, there's a lot that we can learn from each other in terms of, and I think the Ghana example was very particular. If you go to our airport, can you see any South African product in our airport shops? No, you can't. And why is that? I think but we have those products. It's just that we're not taking it to the next level to say, let us put it out there. Let us build this. Let us build by ensuring that we are much more forthright in supporting companies to get their products in the market, and I think that's critical. We started to look at another, and I think this is a very interesting project, and I don't know if Dr. Sia Ntutula is here, because we've been working with Sia through the Foreign Commonwealth Development Organization through the FCDO. We've been working with the Intini consultation to develop a SA Kenya food exchange program. And through this, we've been looking across the different geographies. What are the opportunities to collaborate? What are the opportunities to exchange knowledge, to look at demonstrations and support in terms of technology dissemination, etc. And this is actually starting to show some very fruitful results. We haven't, and hopefully we'll be able to release some of that soon. And some of the areas that we prioritized for this was potato, seed production, vegetable seed production, fish and poultry feed production. What we've also found that because at South Africa we might be food secure at a national level, we have household food insecurity, so we have very common challenges when it comes to supporting rural innovation. So there are a lot of opportunities for learning, for knowledge exchange, for tech dissemination, and we do have the necessary IP frameworks to ensure that we can do this in the context of our existing frameworks. If you look at in terms of policy, we have sufficient policy, and this is my last point, we have sufficient policy out there to indicate what needs to be done. It's the doing that becomes a challenge, and we need to be much more focused on making sure that we put the right people in the room to start the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, do we have a speaker? A microphone.
Whether we should be looking at alternative models of funding research and innovation, specifically for the public good, and what is being done from both a practical and a policy perspective to get us there as Africa. Thank you.
And I'm asking you to be a little bit brief in your responses.
So I think indeed we should be looking perhaps at different approaches, because the way we have been going about it hasn't worked very well in our favor. I think one thing we should be very clear about is we have entered a limited resource period across the board. So the traditional ways of raising funding for research need to be looked at differently. The second thing is that we see how funding for research is packaged also changing. We are now seeing most of the research funding being packaged into funding for some of these global research related initiatives or some of the global challenges. So there will be funding, for instance, that's targeted at climate change or climate smart agriculture. And that's where we should also start looking in terms of preparing ourselves as different institutions and practitioners in the research environment. Within the country, I think one area where I don't think we have explored quite well is the levies that are collected by government across the different commodities in the sector, to look at how you can have some of those being applied in public research, to fund public research, because the funds are generated within this same economy, and the public research that is going to generate knowledge and products and services for the sector will benefit the same industries. And that's one area I think we should perhaps consider looking closely at.
Thanks. Dr. Lita already spoke to the issues of levies, but I think the one thing that, so during the master plan process, there was a lot of focus on increasing the transformation component of the levies, which helps us with the rest of the pipeline, but there isn't a mandatory amount to say this proportion should be for R&D. So I think that's an untapped opportunity, and perhaps it's something that we must look at more closely in terms of how we work closely with agriculture now that we are starting to look at the implementation of the master plan and the decadal plan. The second thing is the issue around maximizing the resources you have, and government is very focused on public-private partnerships across all sectors in terms of how we can strengthen partnerships and how we can make sure that they are much more relevant partnerships, whether it's even with international organizations, with local donors. And if you, so when I mentioned the International Research Consortium, it's about how can we ensure that there's follow-on funding, because some, you know, the Africa Milk Project, for example, demonstrated such good results, but the follow-on funding was then missing. So we work with international organizations, they put funding for these partnerships, and then the follow-on funding is missing. So I think that's then something that's very critical. The last thing I want to mention is that through the decadal plan, the DSI is looking at enhancing the budget coordination process, because we realize that through government, there's a lot of funding that goes to agriculture, but we are not talking to each other as well. So I think we need to coordinate, and through the budget coordination process, it would be how we maximize what we have to deal with the relevant processes. So that's, I think I want to stop there. Thanks.
So thank you. Apologies, I think you realize we started late and we are running a little bit late. So I'm going to end this first half. I'm hoping that both of you'd stick around in case questions arise, but then also quickly move into our second session, which is now getting more specific, looking at one type of the technologies. I think in one of your presentations, you talked about biotechnologies, digital technologies, and social innovation. So getting some more insight into some of these technologies and how they are finding application within our environment is key. So thank you. Help me thank our first set of panelists. Just checking, is the second presenter logged on? No, I'm talking. Is Dr. Dupreez on? Okay, sure. Thank you. So we are going to enter into our second session, which is looking at digital technologies towards resilience in agriculture. And for that, I'm going to ask our first panelist, Dr. Teboho Setibe, who is Group Executive for ICT at the Agricultural Research Council, driving a lot of digitalization programs within agricultural R&D environments. And after that, we are going to have Dr. Dupreez, who is also coming from an industry perspective, looking at spatial intelligence. So he is a director within a company called Spatial Intelligence, looking at the applications of GIS and GIS models into agricultural systems. So Dr. Setibe, thank you. And if I can ask for 15 minutes.
Nice. Good morning. In fact, I thought I was a second panelist, so I was a bit shocked when you called my name, but nevertheless, I am ready for the presentation. As Dr. Farai has indicated, I will be talking about digital technologies, particularly focusing on smart agriculture. But I thought it's important as well that I start at a very high level, talk about top strategic technology trends, and then I'll drive a little bit into smart agriculture. But I want to conclude with a very, very important aspect, which is blockchain technology and how it can be applied in agriculture in particular. I've got quite a number of slides, but like Doctor has asked me to do, I'll try and go through them very, very quickly. But I thought it's important that I cover all those three key aspects. Starting with the technology trends. In fact, what Gartner does on an annual basis, it will conduct a survey of a number of CEOs, and they ask them a number of questions, in particular priorities. So for 2022, they asked about more than 100 CEOs throughout the entire throughout the entire world, wanting to understand what are the top three key priorities for 2022. They came up with efficiency as number one, and the second one, digitalization, and the third one is growth. And then in response to that, they asked the CIO, understanding what are the top three priorities for the CEO, how do you respond to those kind of priorities? And the first one, in response to growth, they indicated the force multiplier. I'll come to that in terms of what it means. The second one, in terms of digitalizations, they indicated creative technology, which is what we're going to be speaking about today. And then the third one, efficiency. Scalability is very, very fundamental. I'll touch on all three. Based on those three key priorities, they then develop themes around those priorities. And the first one is how do you accelerate growth? The second one is change. And then the third one is trust, which is very, very fundamental. As we bring all these technologies, trust becomes very, very important in terms of how do you move forward with these technologies. In terms of themes, so they look at the themes in terms of priorities and they map them to technologies. You'll see at the bottom there, they talk about data, and the other aspect is cloud, which I'll touch on it a little bit. And then in the middle layer, the key one is the second one, which is hyper automation. And I'll also touch on the decision intelligence. I will not go through on all of them, but I'll touch on the key ones that I think is important for us to understand before we move to the next area. In terms of trust, data is very, very key. I'm sure we all know. Without data, you are not be able to make an informed decision. But it's not also important, it's not only about decisions. It's about how fast you can make those kind of decisions. So how you organize your data is very, very important, but you should be able to dispense data at a speed that is required for managers to make decisions. That's a very, very fundamental statement there. And then the second one, once you have got data, you need infrastructure for you to be able to handle that data. Once you have established a proper infrastructure, because it doesn't help you have got what you call big data, but you don't have the infrastructure for it. Develop a proper infrastructure that is able to manage that particular data. But most importantly, once you have got the data now organized in a manner, you should be able to have what we call platform services. And for you to have platform services, you want devices to talk to each other. I'll talk about the platform services in the next slide, just to expand it a little bit more. But what is very, very fundamental in this particular slide is the left side where it says as a service. It can be either infrastructure, it can be technology, but you want to provide it as a service, which is very fundamental. Moving on now to the next one, which is in terms of change that you need in the organization. I think decomposing applications that we have got is very, very important. We have got various data sources, various applications, but they must be able to talk to each other. And they must be able to talk to each other in a manner that we are able to get some kind of intelligence. That's very, very important. That also assists you in terms of how do you make decisions much faster. So and that's where the issue of decision support, augmentation, and in particular automation come into play. But as you do that, you want to make sure that you do them in an affordable manner, which is cheaper from the technology perspective, but secondly, faster for the business to adopt. Most importantly as well, for the customers, you must have some kind of business models that you are able to derive value out of that particular exercise that you are conducting. So the three key aspects there is cheaper, faster, and better in terms of for you to get value. Key outcomes: quality in the process, speed, and agility. They all go together. You can't have one and not the other. Because if you have got quality and there's no speed, then it doesn't really help, because now you made the wrong decision already by the time you receive that particular data. So they must all go together, which is quality, speed, and data, and agility. Moving on to to the last one. The first two are fundamental for you to drive it to the last point. But essentially, this is what goes out to the public, which is what we call visual reality. You'll see there on the left-hand side with what we call retail VR. VR stands for visual reality. You are able to visualize what you are able to see. Whether you go to a retails, you must get some kind of a similar kind of experience. I'm sure we have seen in terms of 3Ds, in terms of online learning, what difference had it made during the COVID. Bring it closer to us, if you look at geolocation services, if you are able to provide that particular visualization, it helps on customers or on researchers to be able to make an informed decision just by looking at the pictures. Just wrapping in this particular exercise, I think we are all familiar with what the first component, which is automation. But automation is fixed. Now, lately, what we have seen happening, we're moving toward autonomous. That's why we talk about self-driving vehicles. But now technology has moved even far beyond that, whereby we are looking at autonomic. What it means is that you are able to self-modify. If the software, for instance, has got a bug, it should be able to pick up that particular bug and modify itself. But of course, for you to be able to do all those kind of technology, you will need an infrastructure, and you will need a platform that you are able to run all those kinds of services. I want to now move to the closer to us in terms of the discussion for today. But before I do that, I thought it was important I just raised some of the key issues in terms of what constrains us in agriculture. The first one is inefficiencies. The second one is infrastructure. The third one is security. And the fourth one is uncertainty. And if you look at the inefficiencies, that's where we have got low-hanging fruit in terms of what we can do in terms of technology. Of course, infrastructure such as electricity, the roads, and others are also important. And when you look at security, which is theft of stock, which is quite prevalent lately, and then there's uncertainties around what we are going to do as a country in terms of land reform there. When it comes to technology, particularly focusing on efficiencies, precision agriculture, I think the previous speaker spoke about it, is very, very fundamental. But of course, like I've indicated, it requires infrastructure. The primary focus, we must make sure that we have got infrastructure that we need. And once we have got a proper and reliable infrastructure, we are able to look at precision agriculture. What it means, in short, you are able to map all the crop types, monitoring of growth stages, weed mapping, water requirement that's required for particular crops. Those are just some of the things that we can do in terms of precision agriculture. At ARC in particular, we have got a number of advisory services. This is just one of them, whereby we are looking at diseases, and we are assisting small farmers in terms of how do they go about managing this kind of diseases. So what I'm showing here is just one of the advisory services. The other one is looks at cultivars, that providing a comprehensive information as far as cultivars is concerned. And then the third one looks at how do you assess farmers, particularly for the cattle breeding. So we have got about more than 30 of those applications, but the key is the impact of those applications that we're developing as the ARC to the farmers. I want to now talk about blockchain, which is, I think, the theme for today in terms of food safety. You will see the blockchain has got a number of use cases. You can use it in a supply chain. You can use it in manufacturing. It's very, very popular in finance. But there is some potential use case in food safety, and that's what I want to focus on today. So, but before I even go to those food safety, at a very high level, I thought it was important that I just mentioned what is blockchain. at a simple, in its simplest form, a blockchain is a shared ledger. That's what it means. But it has got a number of permutations trying to solve a particular problem. If you look in this particular picture here, you have got a number of stakeholders, we as a bank, auditors, record management, and over the entire blockchain, the entire value chain. What is very, very fundamental here is that this type of, from this type of picture, is inefficient, it's expensive, and it's very vulnerable. So what do you want to do? You want to make sure you've got what we call a shared ledger, which is permissioned, which is got consensus, provenance, immutable, and finality. What it means is that consensus, if you've got about 6 people within a value chain, they must all agree on a particular agenda. For instance, I think to make it much simpler so that we understand what it means by consensus. NATO, for example, in terms of what's happening in terms of a political landscape, if you want to join this movement called NATO, all 30 members must agree. If one doesn't agree, in other words, you cannot do that. It's the same concept in terms of a blockchain. All the other stakeholders that are there, okay, I can see I'm running out of time. Let me just, so the four key fundamentals in terms of blockchain is that shared ledger, smart contracts, consensus, and privacy. Those are the 4 principles that drive blockchain technology. I want to move to where I talk about in terms of particularly for our space. So if you look into this particular picture, you have got a farmer, you have got a processor, you have got a warehouse, you have got distribution, you have got consumers, you have got planting, which is very close to farming. All those stakeholders, they need to agree, they need to cooperate with one another to ensure that this particular solution is effective, which is blockchain. Let's now move to particularly the Walmart case study, which is what I want to talk about today, essentially. Blockchain fundamentally is about in terms of food safety, accessing of information. It can prevent counterfeiting, but most importantly, it provides transparency throughout to all the key stakeholders. So in terms of what it does, in terms of provenance, it provides consumer, supplier, carriers, retailer within the value chain with transparency. That's number 1. How do you do that in terms of digitalizations? But the key benefit is that you can take an item from beginning to end, which is what is very essential as far as blockchain is concerned. Let's have a look now. We may all recall what happened in terms of 2006. There was an issue in terms of Spanish. And you can imagine, it says there it was about 199 cases. 3 deaths, 31 HUS. Those are the diseases that are related to the kidneys. For a period of a month, spinach could not be sold in 2006. So you can imagine now what it does to the entire world in terms of not being able to sell that particular spinach for a period. What blockchain does, it combines all those stakeholders in terms of how are you able to trace. So what Walmart and IBM did, they had a pilot which was run about 3 years ago. It focused particularly on mango and pork. The mango one was done in China, and then the pork one was done in the US. But if you look at the process from the beginning of the planting of a mango all the way to shipping to the store, there are quite a number of activities, about 10, 12 of them in total. By the time a mango gets into the other side, it's very difficult if there's a problem to trace it back to where it came from. And that can be very, very, very problematic in terms of when there is an issue in terms of problems. I'm almost wrapping up now. So let's look in terms of pork in particular in China. China's customers in particular, they demand trust. So what happened in terms of that particular pilot? Walmart had to make sure that all the activities in terms of pork, they've got a smart tech. They follow the product all the way to packaging, using cameras as well as RFI, making sure that at every single stage within the process, there are cameras. It's a very expensive process, but it helps in terms of you tracing back to where the problem might have arisen. Shipping, in terms of shipping of the trucks deployed, they were able to put technology within the trucks, such as temperature, humidity sensors, to make sure in terms of quality, should there be a problem, they're able to trace it back as well as to where it happened as well. Similarly, in terms of mango as well, it was done in the channel, like I said, but what was important there was to make sure that there is accountability. Food quality was very essential, and they were able to reduce what used to be solved in 7 days into 2.2 seconds. Very, very important. But what is very critical is the cooperation between different stakeholders within the chain. Just to conclude, blockchain can save time, remove costs, reduce risk, and increase trust, which is very, very important. I think with that, I think I'll stop it here, since I have now running out of time. But thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tebo. I'm thinking of foot and mouth disease and blockchain. So I might want to ask that question at some point. But without wasting time, we'll call our next speaker, panelist who is virtual. So I'm not sure from my tech side, is he ready? Thank you. You can start. The floor is yours, Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that you're all able to see this, the presentation that I've just put on.
Yes, so we are able to see the presentation, but can you all hear? Oh. Okay, let us just sort the tech side, this side. So is it possible to increase the volume? Okay. Can you go over again?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. If you can just see if you all can hear me and just let me know, then I can move on with the presentation.
Yes, thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So, sorry just for not being there. We're busy with a project for the Department of Agriculture for crop estimates. So it's very important in terms of food security, and the project ran a bit late and I need to do a presentation. So unfortunately I couldn't be down there, and my apologies for that. So my presentation is with regards to the digital technology innovations towards resilient agricultural food systems. So just a quick base in terms of what we do from the company side, SIQ, is we are very much focused on spatial information, as has been alluded to. Our spatial information is built up from a platform of data collection, which we then further process the information, and ultimately we would like to get to a sort of the pinnacle of all things, which is spatial business intelligence for governments, for departments, for provincial departments, and our very much focus is in the sphere of agriculture. And I think it's for today's discussion, I just want to highlight the areas that I think is very relevant to my presentation today. And this is with regards to technologies such as digital and biotechnologies that have revolutionized the agricultural sector, with positive results in improved production efficiencies under limited resources. Now, importantly, my presentation will focus on the ability to predict production challenges and the response of agricultural sectors to such stresses, as well as improved market structures and the accessibility to all sectors of agriculture. So I think we can agree that in terms of things such as climate change, etc., we are very much focused ultimately on measuring what the production is. And there's a very good saying that goes that if you can never manage what you can't measure. And I would just like to highlight that again. You can't manage what you can't measure. For us, as a company, it's very important to measure. So if we're looking at things such as climate change, it's important to know if something has really changed, or are we just measuring it incorrectly and we think there are changes happening. So, especially in Africa, I think the measuring of things such as production outputs is very limited. Our previous speaker, Dr. Satibe, has highlighted some of the constraints as being inefficiencies and infrastructure, lack of infrastructure. So those inefficiencies in terms of measuring properly will highlight some negative effects down the line. And I think it's important for us to measure production correctly. The project that we've implemented over the past almost 20 years now is a project looking at crop estimates. And the project was basically designed with Africa in mind. So where we know there's a lack of infrastructure to implement projects, where we know there's inefficiencies, and this project really was designed around that area. And I'll highlight some of that a bit later. But let's just start with the project and the outcome of this project. So the success of this project is basically measured by this slide that I have now, which this slide only focuses on one crop, but we do multiple crops for our National Department of Agriculture. And this is now focused on the total maize. This is what we have estimated in the beginning of the season, and then it's compared at the end of the season when all deliveries have been done and the crop has been measured through various organizations such as the South African Grain Information Services, etc. So you can see there on that slide that I've sort of highlighted three different periods. The first period is from 1998 to 2003, and this is the measurement. If it was a perfect system, all the bars will be around the 0%, and this is the difference between the actual final crop that was measured and the crop that we estimated. So you can see the black line on the top and the bottom gives you the 5% deviations from the actual crop, and we try and stay within that 5%, and if we can, within 2.5%. So you'll see from the period 1998 to 2003, there's lots of times that the crop was underestimated, and you'll see all the estimations were underestimation. Then the next period, 2004 to 2008, also a number of times it's been over the 5% mark. At least there's one sort of estimation that was a bit of an overestimate. And then you see the period 2009 to 2021 last year, and you can see most of them are within the 5% mark. In fact, predominantly the ones are below the 2.5% mark. So our crop estimate, and this is when the project was implemented since 2007, and you can see the impact that it's had on crop estimates. So our government has a very good idea of what the crop is on a monthly basis in terms of policy setting and planning that makes a massive difference. So just in essence how the project sort of starts, and I want to include all the forms of technology that's used. So it starts off with remote sensing and the mapping of various fields. We've mapped, this is a map of South Africa indicating all the sort of black dots that you see is individual fields that's been mapped. And you're looking at approximately 14 million hectares of fields that's been mapped in South Africa. And South Africa has a total area of approximately 122 million hectares. So there's one of the areas of technology that's been used with remote sensing and the mapping. We've also developed a number of data capturing tools. Obviously, our capturing takes place in the field, so we need quite a lot of tools. This is typically the tools that's been developed for that, and this is all in-house development technology that's playing a massive part with regards to hardware as well as software. Then the next sort of technology environment is GIS, Geographic Information Systems, that plays also a very important role in terms of the whole planning of the project. Yes, GIS is used for the stratification, and in simple terms that just means if we're looking for a specific crop such as maize, where are we likely to find that crop? So this is all the sort of phases of stratification to highlight areas. You can see how the areas has become smaller and smaller where we're actually looking at finding our crop of interest that we're looking for. Then the next sort of technology environment is GIS, but more with reference to geostatistics. So it's important for us, because we're using a frame, a sample frame, and not a sort of census approach, because it's very time critical to develop crop estimates in all countries. So you can see we use a sort of a grid frame that we refer to as a point frame, and then we select various fields with that point frame from a statistical platform, and that's another form of sort of technology that's been incorporated in this project. Then further on, we do a data analysis, we do an aerial observation, which I'll highlight a bit more just now. But there's a specific fields that's been overflown, and the crop type has been captured for each of those fields, and those sort of grey lines that you can see there are the actual track that's been flown to actually capture that information in the field. This is our platform that we use. It's an aerial platform which we do an observation approach. So you can see on the right-hand side is the pilot. On the left-hand side is what we refer to as an observer. These observers are typically farmers that are familiar with the areas that we're operating in, and they're capturing the information as we fly through the different areas. You can see that it's at quite a low altitude. We fly at approximately 300 feet above the ground, and that's a typical picture that you'll be seeing. And that's what it looks like from so in future, I believe when the drone technology catches up in terms of being able to cover extensive areas, at this stage, extensive areas are only covered by military drones, and more commercial type of drones are not covering it, but I think in the near future we'll have drones that will be able to cover these areas. The only problem is you sort of lose the observation side, where you have a farmer who can see context, which is extremely important. So to capture the right information, you need to be able to see the context, in which you'll probably lose in the drone environment, but I think it's going to play a role in future. So in essence, what I would like to sort of highlight with today's presentation is that this is only possible through the integration of a number of technologies, which I've highlighted sort of individually as I went along. So if you look at this slide, and we start there in the top left corner, it's an aerial platform, which is very important. And the reason being is it is very cost effective, and it covers a large area in a very short space of time. Our previous speaker highlighted that data needs to be faster. We need to capture data faster and collect it faster, because in agriculture the environment changes all the time. So if we can't collect it fast, then it becomes really irrelevant. So that's a very good platform. It also, the nice thing about that platform, it doesn't require a lot of infrastructure. So in Africa, where we have infrastructure challenges such as proper roads, on getting to places to collect information, the aerial platform is ideal in terms of those environments, and that's exactly why that environment was created in terms of an aerial platform. There's obviously the normal data capturing tools, which is very important. Then sort of on the bottom right, we've got the geographic information system, which is extensively used. I think one of the previous speakers also highlighted that spatial planning is critical. So all our projects, specifically in agriculture, is very much spatially focused, because agriculture is very much a spatially distributed environment and sector. So it almost becomes impossible if you do not plan it from a geographic information system perspective. Also, satellite imagery, as you've seen, is used in terms of not just for the planning side of mapping out various the crop fields, but also in terms of determining crop strains, where crops are experiencing some strains in certain areas, and those are also highlighted. And then very importantly, the human capital, that's built up over time. We've got a number of producers that work with us in the aerial platform environment, where they can distinguish between around 40 to 50 different crop types in the South African environment. So it's very important, and that's built up over time. And then in the center of it all is a statistical framework, which we refer to as a geographic sampling frame, which is very much used worldwide in terms of calculating crop type. But again, the very important thing here is not highlighting one of the technologies, but it's the potential of integrating all of these technologies to a solution that can alleviate a number of issues with regards to knowing what a crop size is. So I'd just like to end up with my final remarks. I think technology is evolving at quite a rapid pace. I don't think that could be argued, and it's developing quicker as we go along. I think we need to sort of ask ourselves, why is Africa's uptake in the technology environment so slow? Why is it happening so slow? So one of the reasons that I would like, there's a number, but one of the reasons that I would like to put forward is that there's so much technologies out there, but you need people that really understand all of those technologies and how they can work together to provide ultimately a solution. Ultimately, a technology is not a solution, but implementing it into a system where it's integrated with other technologies, then it becomes a solution. I think today there's lots of technology that's being developed in, for instance, the medical field, that could become tomorrow one of the most important technologies in the agricultural domain. But we need people that can see that and can implement it from that perspective. So are we developing the skills to recognize this? That's a very important. I've in my dealings in Africa, where I've done presentations, I cannot see that that's happening. There's a very much a focus on individual technologies, but putting it all together, there's not a lot of focus on that. So are we, as we go along, developing technology integrators? That's what I refer to it. And are we doing our best to make that happen in the form of, even in the research environment, are we putting enough effort for those technologies to evolve and for that integration to take place? I think that's my presentation. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Eugene. Thank you, Dr. Thabo Sitibe. I think these two previous panelists behaved than the ones before. My question before I open it up to the audience, and it's two questions for both of you. I think for me, the question about, I think we are struggling as a continent with issues of traceability, and what came into my mind was the foot and mouth disease, and how we can lose all the export quotas just because we can't trace what's where and where it's coming from. Do you see blockchain helping in that space, or any of the technologies that you have discussed before, how they can help, and any efforts that are being made to mainstream them to address that challenge? Then to Eugene, my question is really, I think, and you mentioned it, to say you cannot manage what you cannot measure. And one of the limitations or the challenges with smallholder agriculture is we just don't have records, we just don't have the data. So are we finding these applications going there? Are they in those sectors of the communities? Are you using aerial technologies in smallholder agriculture, or do you see yourself doing that, if not yet? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, blockchain is meant particularly for what we've just stated. Although I didn't cover it in details, blockchain has got four key principles. I did mention them. The first one is provenance, to ensure that we have got trace of the origin. And the second one is immutable, which is to ensure that you keep it as long as possible. There are other two key principles, but I think those are the key principles in terms of how to resolve the issue of traceability. Of course, traceability is not something that is coming, that has been there for quite a while. It's not something new. But what blockchain did, it introduced some of the principles that ensures that it takes traceability to the next level. And Those are the two key ones that I've just mentioned. If you think about in terms of food and mouth disease, how long does it take us as a country if we've got such an outbreak? It takes quite a while for us to trace back to where it came from. And that's where the idea of provenance comes into play. If you think of what, just what I said earlier in terms of what Walmart and IBM did, it was a pilot, particularly focusing on pork. They have now taken it to the next stage. But what used to take about 7 days in a developed country, they brought it down to about seconds, 2.2 seconds, as they indicated in their research. So it's absolutely something that can be done. But of course, as I've indicated earlier on as well, blockchains requires infrastructure, which is one of the key issues that are outlined as part of the research. And the other key issue that, of course, for every technology that comes into play, you've got some challenges. The other challenges that come into blockchain as well, for the example that you have given me, of course, it doesn't have an issue in terms of the right to be forgotten. But if you think about it in terms of the GDPRS, it does bring also other aspects which are legal aspects, the right to be forgotten. So if you have done an operation, let's say about quite a number of years back, and then blockchain's principle says immutable provenance. In other words, all the records of your faces, for instance, if it was a surgery, they have to be tracked. And they are to some extent in conflict with some of the regulations. And that's what is currently being discussed within the technology. But to answer your question, yes, definitely, it is the right use case. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugene, did you get my question?
Yes. I
Okay,
got
you
your
can
question.
go ahead and make a response. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned during the presentation, our focus was when we developed and designed the system is that we can implement it within the Africa context, in other words, within the smallholder, small-scale farming environment. So that's what we had in mind when we developed it. Now, our application of that within South Africa, as has been previously mentioned, has been very much more in the commercial environment, just because the commercial structure in South Africa is so much more prominent than the small scale. However, what I can tell you is that we've done a project now for the Eastern Cape Department of Rural Development, which was only focused on smallholder and small-scale farming, looking at production, not just production, but looking at production, infrastructure, and production of various crop types, infrastructure as well as livestock and game within the smallholder, small-scale environment, and which was a very successful project, so much so that we have just actually been appointed to do the Vembe district municipality, which is basically the northern part of the Limpopo province. Their agriculture is predominantly actually small-scale agriculture in that area. It's a very dry area, as you all know. But there are some irrigation schemes around that area. So we've been just appointed to do what they refer to as a smallholder census, and look at what the agricultural production is that's taking place, including the livestock and including agro-processing. And they would like to be informed on potential areas where they can expand their agro-processing plants, etc. So that's the sort of purpose of that project. So even though we've applied, most of our application was in the commercial sector because of South Africa's commercial environment, there's lots of applications now happening within the smallholder and small-scale environment.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes. We need the mic. Yes. Put one here. To link, yes. Sorry.
Thank you, Farai, and thank you for the very articulate presentations. I want to also echo Farai's questions differently around the tech transfer. Dr. Dupree's mentioned that among some of the critical things that needs to be in place is human capacity. And I feel that in terms of tech development and innovations, the capacity is there, but I think it's limiting in terms of tech transfer, especially in the smallholder sector. Because some of the technologies that we develop, you go and you train, you leave, and they start doing business as usual, the way they are accustomed to. So the question that I have then is, at what point of tech development do we need to start doing, tech transfer, and are we doing enough to make sure that by the time the technology is ready and applicable, the industry is also well educated to utilize it successfully and to make more impact. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think you can both responses to both of them, isn't it? Okay, sure. So I'll start with you, Dr. Setibe.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the question. Yes, indeed, technology transfer is one of key challenges. But essentially for me, I think what's underlying that key challenges is the first one, two aspects. The first one is change management, which is very, very fundamental. As we develop all this technology, do we have a proper change management process in place to make sure that we're able to have proper channels in terms of transferring those technology? We have better training to the right people. Do they have infrastructure? Do they have within their localities? Are you training them in the language that they are able to understand? So there's quite a number of things in terms of change management that you have to put into play. But I think for me, the key one, which is very, very fundamental, technology aspects, what we normally do, we get together somewhere. We will be, I think, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be right here. All the government technology CIOs and high-tech companies, we get together. We develop a number of applications. But did we actually ask the person who's going to use the application whether he did that application? I think that's very fundamental. That's where we should start. You go to the person who did a service, in our case, farmers. Let's understand them, what do they need, rather than just going away and building applications and bringing it back to them. So the notion that we know what farmers need, we need to change that particular mindset. I think that's very fundamental. If we can sit down with the farmers before we introduce all those technologies, to understand their challenges before we even get into technology. Technology will follow afterwards. I think for me, those are the two key fundamentals that we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugene, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. Thanks.
Okay, it's your turn. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So I would 100% agree with Dr. Setibe in terms of the response to that. What we found, especially is, just as an example now for this project that we're doing in the Vengo District Municipality, is there's so much information out there that a district municipality, the officials aren't aware of that information being available. And that information would make a massive difference to how farmers react and what they sort of plant and how do they market, etc. So that information is accessible and it's public, but for some other reason it's not being used. So I would 100% agree that that information needs to feed down to the farmers level. And obviously the best environment for that is the people that work with the farmers on a regular basis. I'm talking specifically of the small scale and smallholder farmers. So those would be, in some areas it varies from one area to another. Some areas it's the input suppliers that almost work most of the farmers in that area. Other areas it's the extension officers. So yeah, it always amazes me that people at officials at district, municipality, provincial level aren't aware of the information that's available and therefore can't inform their farmers on that information, which would make a massive impact. So, but I 100% agree. We first need to know what it is that the technology, how it should look like, and before it's rolled out to those areas. But I think our biggest constraint is actually getting it down to farm level. Who are the people that are working with those farmers at farm level? And I think there is also maybe a bit of a disjoint.
Thank you. Any burning questions before we wrap up? Yes, please. Just wait for the mic to come on.
opportunity. I was wondering how we could use the blockchain technology to improve or to improve the local production of agricultural crops in South Africa in terms of maybe resulting in less importing of agricultural crops in South Africa and more gain to local farmers. Thank you.
So I think this is directed to you, Dr. Seto.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions. So as I've explained earlier on, the fundamentals of blockchain is traceability, is to be able to assist those who are within the value chain to be able to track and trace the product on or any item that is moving within the blockchain. So with regard to your question in particular, I think it goes just beyond blockchain because blockchain, like as I've just indicated, is confined to traceability in terms of efficiency. But you need other kind of technology as well to be able to make sure that where you are, you develop a product within technology that are for local farmers. On typical examples, if you look at the technology that we use in terms of that we developed lately, we focus on smart devices. Technologies are available. You are able to support smart farmers in terms of understanding when to crop, what type of crop they should use, and in what season. But if your technology is confined to smartphones and other devices that they are not accessible to smallholder farmers, you are by default excluding those particular farmers. So you need to look at various type of technology. And that's where my point earlier on in terms of understanding the farmers and their challenges as well, to be able to direct the technology to assist them directly. Things like USSD for instance, you are able, even if you don't have the smartphone, you're still able to access information. So when you develop these technologies, you need to ensure that you also factor in terms of constraints, in terms of infrastructure that are of course at our midst that we have to cater for. I think those are the things that one need to look for. But for you to be able to get that kind of information, you need to talk to the farmers. Very, very important. And that's where the issue of the extensions, collaboration with the technology providers and extensions become very, very fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had good sessions, very informative sessions. I'm just going to give an opportunity to all the four panelists to just give 1 minute close. And I'm thinking, all these technologies that we talked about, whether it's from a policy perspective, whether it's from really the application perspective, there are issues of risks, there are issues of trust. So if you can just give me two minutes each, your comment around those two factors and technologies within the agricultural space. I'll start with Dr. Maneshri, Dr. Lita, Dr. Tebo, and then end with Dr. Eugene. Then we'll close up.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think because the digital agriculture is such a topical issue, a critical thing I think in terms of digital agriculture and modernizing the sector is about how do we ensure that we have national systems that have scientifically validated data, because the question to a farmer is, which data set should I use? And I think for us, in terms of research, development and innovation, scientifically validated data in those databases is critical, and coordinating that. And the next thing is, how do you ensure that local entrepreneurs, because we want to look at promoting local technology, how do local entrepreneurs harness and have, use that information to put the necessary tools in place? And I think we are at that stage where those questions, and I don't think we have all the answers as to how to do it. And the issues around data security, who manages the data, and if it's regulatory, obviously the Department of Agriculture becomes critical. But those are things that need to be at the forefront of then the access to information. Now, but in terms of the smallholder farmers, the question of developing, I think that's already being done, because a lot of the demonstration of technologies are already being done with smallholder farmers.
It's the question of long-term sustainability and how do you take that? So I don't have all the answers, but I think those are the forefront of what we as policymakers are looking at. Thanks.
You can take the mic.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I think just a couple of things from me. The first one, which I touched on also during my presentation, is we definitely need to increase our investment in R&D. I think the case has been made over and over again in terms of what the benefit of increased investment in R&D is. And really some of our most enduring challenges can be resolved through our improved investment in R&D. The second point from me is, we need to close the gap between science and policy development. And this might seem trite. Again, this is something that we talk about, almost regularly when we talk to each other. But we need to find models that integrate the knowledge that's being generated through our scientific endeavors into the policy development space, because I think this is where we still miss it. That gap still exists. Just the other day, and this is about our most recent document, the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan that's just been signed off now by different stakeholders, where the building of infrastructure, crushing infrastructure, has actually moved to a province in Gauteng in South Africa, for instance, that is completely at odds with the recommendations of the spatial analysis process that was an input into the process of developing the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan. So it's not something that used to happen in the past. Even today, it's still happening. That's why we need to keep emphasizing it. And then the final thing for me is just to say we need to embrace these partnerships because, and whether we're talking about knowledge partnerships, resource partnerships, because this is the direction that the world is also, and correctly, I believe, going through, because our challenges are not necessarily ending across when we reach borders or when we reach the border of the institution. There is a lot of linkages that we need to understand and work with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Program Director. I think I do concur with the two previous speakers, but maybe just to add, I think for me the issue of collaboration is very, very important. In particular, when we come to R&D, two things I think for me. The first one is our research should be more applied. That's the first aspect. And then secondly, the key aspect is that collaborations. Previously, if you think about it in terms of, when you focus on in terms of technologies in particular, like I said earlier on, there are quite a lot of various applications that are out there. But if you really zoom into those in terms of utilization, BSERC or any other organization, you will find that utilization is very, very low. And primarily, mainly to one of the aspects that I mentioned earlier on, in terms of understanding our customers, which in this particular instance, our farmers, But most importantly, understanding their challenges, because challenges will differ from one place to the other. If you look at yes, problem with technology as well. If you look at blockchain technology, it's a very good technology. But are we ready for that kind of technology? The answer is yes. But we have some work to do in terms of infrastructure. We have to get our fundamentals right to make sure that we have got infrastructure that is able to assist us with those particular challenges that we do have. But as we do that, one of the aspects which is very, very fundamental in terms of blockchain, for instance, is collaboration. We need to be able to cooperate with one another. I think that's very, very key in terms of the technologies going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Eugene?
Thank you, Program Director. I think the previous panelist has touched on most of the areas. Maybe just two areas with regards to risk. I think one of the previous panelists mentioned in terms of data security. So just in terms of that, my experience has been that due to things such as the POPI Act, etc., there's a lot of emphasis on data security, but we must just sort of make sure that it doesn't hamper our accessibility to data. And I feel this is potentially becoming a problem in the sphere that I'm involved in, is that my sort of biggest thing is that we need to share data as far and as wide as possible and as quickly in agriculture as possible, because data becomes irrelevant over time. So we must just make sure that things such as the POPI Act, etc., do not hamper people's access to data which is public knowledge, not interfering with an individual's privacy, but we must make sure that it doesn't hamper accessibility to data on a regular basis. So that's the one aspect. In terms of trust, trust is in the environment that we're talking about now is unfortunately it's grown over time. So a farmer will only rely on a technology that over time has proven itself, and I think that's important. So we must make sure that the technology that we take to them will work and will make a difference to their bottom line, which is basically their production or their income or whatever it's measured. So if we can't assist, if the technology can't assist with that, then we mustn't take it to the farmers.
Thank you so much. I think we can go on and on, but we had a good session. Thank you to the panelists for being generous with your knowledge and experience and sharing with us. And thank you to the audience, those who are in this room and those who have joined virtually. We are going to close now, partly, and the track would resume at 2:15, focusing on the biotechnologies and their contribution in agriculture, but also looking at everything that we have discussed, the issue of convergence, joining all these technologies to assist the farmer and the end user by the end of the day, and scaling up. I think there have been talks about, investments in research and development. You just don't want to invest in a single project. You want to invest in something that really feeds into the community and helps the community. So please come back and get more information around biotechnologies, convergence, and scaling up. Thank you. Thank you.